Welcome to today's webinar, DevExtreme Mobile, Build, Debug, and Deploy, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. In this webinar, see how to create a mobile application targeting iOS, Android, and Windows Mobile, use Visual Studio to create the user interface as well as code and debug, explore the rich collection of widgets to enhance the user experience, and create distribution certificates and deploy to each of the stores. We will do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in your GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. Now, we also have a couple of poll questions for you, and here's the first one. Are you developing client-side mobile apps? And you can select one of the following: yes, no, or possibly in the next 6 months. So are you developing client-side mobile apps? And it looks like 44% yes, 11% no, and 46% possibly in the next 6 months. Perfect. And then our second question, are you familiar with any single-page app frameworks? And again, you can select one of the following: yes, DX-based, yes, other vendors, or no. So are you familiar with any single-page app frameworks? It looks like 22% yes, DX-based, 16% yes, other vendors, and 60% no. Great. And then our final poll question, are you submitting apps to app stores? And again, you can select one of the following: yes, no, would like to, but not yet. So are you submitting apps to app stores? 21% yes, 27% no, and 53% would like to, but not doing it yet. Perfect. Thank you for your valuable feedback, and thank you for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul Usher.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning to everyone. That list of things you want to get covered is quite extensive today, so there's a lot to get through. First thing we'll take a look at is what DevExtreme Mobile is all about. And in a nutshell, it allows you to create a native-looking application that, depending where you deploy it to, will look and feel relative to that device. Now, we're talking about a true single code base here. And it's one of the unique solutions that allows you to do this. We're not talking about shared libraries. We're not talking about PCLs. We're talking about having a single code base that will give you that native user experience everywhere. And that's actually done using an adaptive layout system. You can see from this slide that we work on the basis of the view model or MVVM process. And we've got the model sitting in the background with the view model on top of that. And then we've got the UI elements. Now, DevExtreme Mobile utilizes HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to provide this. And the best thing about it is that you, the developer, don't have to worry about that end layout. If you take a look at an Android application, take a look at an iOS application, there are distinct differences. In some cases, it may be that the navigation elements are positioned at the top or bottom of the screen. It may be that alert views or pop-ups are done differently. The beauty with DevExtreme Mobile is that we've taken care of all those things for you. Another really cool benefit of DevExtreme Mobile is the fact that you can produce store-ready applications. And it really doesn't matter whether you're targeting the Apple iOS Store, Google Play, the Microsoft Store, the Tizen Store, or you're wanting to do things with PhoneGap Build. DevExtreme Mobile has it all covered. I mentioned before that some of this power is delivered by utilizing HTML5, the CSS, and JavaScript libraries. The really cool thing here is the fact that you can create responsive layouts. So not only can you target the operating systems and have your application render natively, you can also target different devices. So you can have one application that's going to render beautifully on a tablet and on a phone, but be responsive. And best of all, you're going to get to leverage all your existing skills and knowledge and have that reuse of code. All of the things that we look at today, the widgets, etc., can be utilized with popular libraries such as AngularJS and Knockout and jQuery. One of my favorite things with DevExtreme Mobile is the fact that you can use it inside your favorite IDE, such as Visual Studio. Now, over the last 12 months, Julian and I have presented a number of different topics on DevExtreme, and we've used everything from a simple text editor, and we've shown you how to integrate with cameras, GPS, etc. What we're going to focus on today is DevExtreme Mobile inside Visual Studio, which really does allow you to create that project from scratch, use the visual designer and other elements that you love inside the IDE, use the debugger, and of course build and package for those stores. Now, DevExtreme Mobile is supported from Visual Studio 2010 all the way through to 2013. And of course, we will be providing support for Visual Studio 2014 when it's released. We currently support the Android, iOS, Windows 8 and Windows Phone platforms and Tizen as it becomes more available. We've got full support for all the modern browsers, including IE, Chrome, Opera, Safari and Firefox. And it's also supported on the integrated mobile browsers on those devices such as Android, iOS, etc. Now, part of the libraries that DevExtreme Mobile deliver is a collection of widgets, powerful visual elements that allow you to focus on building your application quickly. And of course, that's what we're renowned for here at DevExpress, is helping developers get that visual aspect into your applications quickly. Those widgets are broken down into 5 main categories. We'll just take a second to look through some of those. The navigation category, we've got things such as the map control, we've got the tab control, navbar, we've got the multi-view, panoramic view, pivot view, we've got a nice slide out view which gives you a really cool effect on mobile devices, and of course the ever important toolbar. When it comes to interacting with the user, we have a number of options such as standard buttons or action sheets that can be displayed. We've got drop-down menus, lookup items, auto-completion lists. We've got a powerful gallery control and a list view. One of the really nice things with DevExtreme Mobile, taking into account just something as simple as a list view, you don't have to have an understanding of the underlying architecture. You don't need to know what a UI table view is or about cell reuse. It's all taken care of for you. And then you have the additional editors. We've got field set, which allow you to have a group of text boxes in a collection. We've got standard controls, such as the checkbox and number boxes. You've got things such as the text area text box. We've got password boxes, date boxes, and calendar controls. If you're wanting something a little bit different, you've got slider controls, range controls, switches. Effectively, everything you can imagine you'd need to use inside a mobile application. We have also got dialogues and notification panels, such as the popover, alert controls, toast controls, messages or info boxes such as load panels to show you your user that something's happening on screen, and of course the all-important tooltip. Let's take a quick look at some of these things in action. I'm going to switch over to Internet Explorer. And here I'm pointing to the DevExpress website where you can experience some of these things as well. Now, part of the process for DevExtreme Mobile, when you run an application, you get this Chrome-style browser presented as well, where you can very easily switch between different operating systems. So if I go from iOS 7 to iOS 6, we're going to see some of that CSS come into play and re-render that form. Likewise, if I jump across to Android, we're going to see that same style. So let's spend a minute looking at some of these controls. Here's the humble text box and a password field. Obviously the password is hidden with the option to then reveal if the user chooses to. With the date control, we've got popovers that's going to provide a nice style selection for your user, again based on the device that they're running it on. Take the autocomplete. I want to find a city. As soon as I start typing, the autocomplete box is going to appear and allow me to select the item I want. We've got the lookup control. Here on the Android, we can see that not only do we have the search option, as I select an item, it's going to be returned. But how would that then be rendered on another operating system? Switch back to iOS 7. You get the page load. Here I have the text field, password box again, with the same functionality. But it looks as if I've created this natively for iOS. Come down to the autocomplete. Again, I've got the nice popover. However, this time when I choose a lookup, I'm going to get that slide effect and an iOS style selection box, which then disappears when I need it to. The same applies for any of these controls. Depending on the device I want to render it on, switch over to Windows Phone. It now looks as if I've created this dedicated for a Windows Phone. So there's some of the form controls. Next, we'll take a quick look at things like the list controls. iOS 7 again, a simple list, maybe a grouped list with group headers, group 1, group 2, or even custom implementations of list controls. So here we're seeing an image embedded with some extra information. Same thing, switch over to Windows Phone, and we get that nice render. We can see that the selection box looks as if it's been designed for Windows Phone. Go to Custom, yet we still have that ability. We've got the ability to do searches inside the list, all out of the box. Navigation. On the Windows device, the navigation menu sits at the top. You can see that I can add the little notification icons, such as how many comments are unread. As I switch between each page, we're going to see that the information is rendered as if I'm turning pages. Now on the Windows Phone, the little action icon is in the bottom right hand corner, and as I select that, I get this slide up with presenting me with an action selection. However, if I switch to iOS 7 for the same thing, we're going to see that the navigation elements are at the lower of the screen. They look and feel native to the device. This time the action option is on the right hand side, slides up from the bottom like an action panel would. Slightly different again on the Android device. My navigation is still at the lower of the screen, this time in boxes. My action panel is top right with a small popover. The thing I want to drive home here is that there's no code changes that you are required to do to harness this power. And then very quickly, we've got something such as the gallery control. So here we're seeing it on the Android device. I could swipe with my finger, or I could use the navigation icons, and the same thing across all the other elements. Now, I'm not sure whether anybody's asked the question already, but yes, in 14.2, which is coming out next month, we've got support for iOS 8, and things such as the iPhone 6 shell and simulator are all part of that. So we're always trying to keep up to date with what the major vendors are releasing. Now that's all well and good just to sit there and show you some pre-built demos, but what's actually involved in building a DevExtreme application? I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio now and take you through a couple of different things. After you've installed DevExtreme Mobile onto your system, you do File, New Project, you're going to see a new template category inside the templates, and that's called DevExtreme. There's a number of options presented in the window, starting with Basic Application, Basic Application for TypeScript, because not only does DevExtreme support JavaScript, we've got full TypeScript support. There's a multi-channel application, which we're going to take a look at in a second. But first, I want to have a look at what is happening behind the OData Service Wizard. See, when the engineering team put all this together, we understood that any mobile application you write is going to need to talk to some data at some point. And that starts another whole set of conversations. Should you use WCF? Should you use Web API? Should you write an OData service? In some cases, we wanted to make it as simple as possible for you. So I'm going to come through and choose the C# OData service. I'm going to call it Data Service 2 and click OK. Visual Studio is going to do its little thing and present me with the Entity Data Model Wizard. Now, at this point, I could go through and create a blank designer model. I could do code first. I could do code first from database. I'm actually just going to choose the designer from a database, and I'm going to connect this up to a local instance of SQL Express. Inside here, I've got a database file that we used recently on one of our DevExtreme presentations for some books called My Library. I'm going to save that and let it work with Entity Framework 5. At this point, I'm presented with a list of tables and or views that I want to bring in. Keeping it simple, I've got one table called Books. I'm going to tell it that, yes, I want it to pluralize or singularize any generated object names and include any foreign keys. I'll leave the model namespace as is, then click Finish. What we're going to see in a second is a completed project, which is a web service that I can run. Now, inside this project, it's already added support for things like CORS, which is some of the security attributes when dealing with web services, particularly in the HTML sphere. You've got to be careful because you don't want cross-site scripting. There's certain headers that have to be adhered to. And if you take a look at the webinar we did recently on hooking up an application to a legacy WCF service, I go into some more detail. So we've got the core support file here. We've then got the entity model and the rest of the framework, the rest of the service. If I open the service code, everything's been added in there for me, fully commented, and you can step through, make changes if you need to. But for today's presentation, I simply want to run the data service. I need to just make sure that data service is set as a startup page first. And what we're going to see on screen is a response basically confirming that yes, it is providing access to that books collection or entity. So I'm going to copy that URL and use it in just 1 second. Now, one of the other things that I did prior to starting this presentation is created a very quick ASP.NET application utilizing some of our other controls, in particular the grid view control, and bound it to the same set of data. So what we have here is a quick look at what we're going to be interrogating inside DevExtreme. And I'll come back to that page again in a second to see what happens when we edit with DevExtreme. So the next step now is to come through and create my DevExtreme application. Again, I'm going to choose File, New Project. I'm going to choose a multi-channel application this time. Now, multi-channel will allow me to target multiple platforms within the same solution. So it may be that I want to provide a desktop experience, a mobile experience, a particular WinPhone experience, and or Win8. So again, I get to choose my programming language, JavaScript or TypeScript. I'm going to choose mobile and go next. I'm presented with a view as to my navigation options. I can switch between either the iPhone or the Android device to look at how that will render. And I could choose a navigation bar or a slide-out bar. I'll stick with the navigation bar and go next. I'm now presented with an option to hook into a data service. What this is going to do, after I paste the URL in and choose Discover, is give me a list of all entities available from within that service. I'm going to choose the fact that I want to generate the model and the view. and I want the view adding to each platform. In this case, I only have the one. I'm now choosing Finish, and I'll wait for a few seconds while the wizard creates the necessary files in the background. And what we end up with, in this case, is two projects. One being our mobile project, the other being the shared project, where any common code across the desktop, etc., may be placed. Now, DevExtreme project has primary files called DX views. If I just jump in and have a look at, say, the book view, we'll see what I mean. You'll notice inside the Project Explorer, I've got books, I've got book edit, and book details. So when I run this in a second, we'll be able to see exactly what it's built, again, without me doing a lot of work. You'll notice inside Visual Studio, I've got this design canvas on the left, and I've got my markup on the right. Being a HTML JavaScript framework, we're working with traditional tags and a HTML style markup. I can use my toolbox, and I could drag elements or those widgets from the toolbox onto the design surface or directly into the markup code. If I'm wanting to see what it's going to render like, I can use this toolbar here to switch between different operating systems, so iOS 7 or Android. I can also change the device type that it's going to be rendering on. So I could say, show me an iPhone 5 or show me on a Nexus Galaxy what is the view is going to be like. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time inside the code at this level. One of the cool things we can do, though, is apply breakpoints. We can do all our debugging the same as you would with any other Visual Studio application. And that is a really neat feature when working with DevExtreme Mobile. I'm going to run this straight into Google Chrome. And what we'll end up with is an outline of the device similar to what we saw inside the DevExpress website version, but I'm going to have a little bit more control on things that can happen. You'll notice, I'll just switch to full screen view. You'll notice on the top right here, I've got the ability of switching between the different operating systems or the different versions of the operating system, and on the left, I've got the ability to jump between different devices. If I wanted to have this experience on a real device, I can download the DevExpress Courier application onto my tablet or onto my phone and then scan the QR code, and it would then render the device or render the application onto my real device so I could see what was going on. We'll just stick with iOS 7 for the moment. We can see that my view's been created. I've got a navigation element of books, and I can switch to my About page. Remember that books was all built from that entity framework view. And I've got a list of books, the same as we saw inside the web page before. If I click on a book, I'm then delivered all the details. So this is all being provided by the DevExtreme mobile framework. At this point, I could obviously delete an element, it's given me that option, or I can click Edit. It may be that we decide that Gone with the Wind wasn't published in 1937, it was published in 1938. If I hit Save, and now I'm going to switch back to the grid view and just do a refresh. We'll look for Gone with the Wind. I'm looking currently at 1937, refresh, and we can see that straight away on the database, on the backing store, it has been updated, which is really, really powerful. It means that I can straight away edit, update, delete records with that OData service wizard inside my DevExtreme mobile application. I want to come back here. I can implement machine level things such as a refresh. So if I was to change the data in the grid, we'd see it change here. I can also add a new record. So I've decided that we have a new author on the scene called Julian M. Bucknell. He created a book called JavaScript for Dummies. And he released it in 2014. I actually think it's a funny book, so we'll call it comedy, and he priced it at $99.95. It's written in English, although one would consider it difficult to read. It's 5 pages long, and it's an ebook. I press save. That's now showing this list. If I come back to our list here, we're going to see that JavaScript for Dummies is there as well. Very quickly come over to our grid view, do a refresh, and we can see that that book has now been stored on the database. Very, very powerful framework. What I want to do, and something that's going to take a good sort of 10 minutes or more, is step you through what's involved in the build process. It's all well and good to be able to create these great looking applications that are going to render as we want if we don't know how to get it to the relevant app stores. Switching back to Visual Studio, here's an application that we want to play with. The only difference between this application and the one we were looking at before, it's not using a shared project, it's just a single application that I happen to create some certificates for. Now, when you come to the application properties window, so application and then choose properties, you'll see this panel the same as you would inside any Visual Studio application. Inside the General tab, we get the usual things, being able to set the application's title, bundle identifiers, and version control. I can also set my default orientation and whether I want a splash screen to be displayed. If I come over to the Debug section, I can choose to run it in a simulator, what I want my default device to be, overriding orientation, and then some Visual Studio development options. But what I'm interested in really is this Capabilities tab. See, if I'm building an application that's going to be packaged using the PhoneGap framework and deployed to a device, I need to do some special things if I want to interact with the hardware or some of the other elements. With this Capabilities page, I can simply tick the items I want. So it may be I want access to the camera. It may be I want access to the GPS data, or I want to interact with a contacts list. By selecting the options here, the necessary permissions and settings files are written, ready to embed into your package. Then we look at the actual packages themselves. Each app store has a number of different requirements, and I'm going to step through some of those in greater detail, but the number one thing that they all seem to want are icons and pictures. So whether I'm looking at the Android package or I'm looking at the iOS package, you're going to see this request for icons. The build process itself will warn you if you don't supply the minimum required icons. On this particular iOS page, I can also nominate if I want my package to be iPhone specific, iPad specific, or universal binary. Adding icons to your package is as simple as choosing the select option and then coming through and choosing the correct size. If you try and apply an image that's the wrong size, Visual Studio will give you a warning, and so you get to go back and choose the correct size. One of the really nice things about the DevExtreme mobile framework is when it comes to compliance with guidelines as far as how elements should be laid out, the sizes, and all those things, for the core of the navigation system, the widgets, everything's taken care of for you. So the most you have to do at this point is just get all your icon files and apply them. iOS is particular, it even wants something such as your iTunes artwork. Same applies for your Windows Phone package and your Tizen package. That's only a small part of what's required to actually do a build. The first step when working with any of these stores is to make sure that you're a registered developer. Now that process, it should be as simple as logging onto something like developer.apple.com or developer.android.com and creating an account. So the steps I'm about to take you through rely on you having an existing account with the relevant store. One thing that we set out to achieve with DevExtreme Mobile was to provide a build experience that was easy. One example of that is being able to deploy or prepare an IPA package for the Apple App Store that doesn't require a Mac. So you can do everything to deploy to the App Store with Visual Studio. You don't need to have some extra process running. You do not need to be using a Mac. If we right-click on the application and choose Build Native Packages, again we're going to see one of our little wizards appear. And for each platform, we can go through and select what it is we need to do. So if I was building for iOS, I choose iOS, and then I'm going to step through exactly what's needed. Now, because of the number of steps involved, I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint and take you through those screenshots so you know exactly what is required. The first thing when developing for iOS is to create what they call a developer certificate. Now, previously you've had to use other machines or special process to do this. We've now built this into the wizard. So you fill out all the details and you click the Generate Certificate option. That's going to give you a certificate request. On the wizard, you can choose the Open Upload location, and it's going to take you straight to the developer page inside Apple. You'd log on with your credentials, and then you're going to be provided all the steps that you need to do. This process is not the easiest if you've never done it before. And one thing Apple are renowned for doing is changing the look and style of their pages. I hadn't been into iTunes Connect, which is where you do your app management, for a couple of weeks. Preparing for the webinar, jumped in. It's changed completely. So it's one thing to just bear in mind when you're doing this sort of stuff that you're going to get some curveballs every now and then. The first step is to create your certificate. Now we've got the request generated inside Visual Studio. So here I'm going to tell it that I'm happy, I want to continue and generate my actual cert. The wizard inside the web page is going to step me through and actually ask me for my certificate requests. At this point, I choose the Choose File, and I can paste from the Visual Studio prompt the location of where my certificate request was stored. Apple then very graciously go through and give you a certificate to download. Now it's important that these certificates that you create, you keep safe. Any passwords you assign to the certificates, you must keep safe. If you lose them, you have to go through the whole creation process again, and any apps that you have out there with the old certificate, you cannot renew. You basically have to redeploy as a new app. It can be a real painful process. The other thing to watch is also the expiration of these certificates. If you've got apps out in the wild and your provisioning profiles or certificates expire, your apps can in some cases stop working if you're using enterprise licensing, or when you go to deploy updates to the App Store, you will need to go through the process of renewing, which again, depending on the time lapse, can be a really painful process. So now we've got our iOS certificate ready. I can come back into Visual Studio and I can select my certificate file. I then need to give it a password, so a nice strong password in there, and I can click the Finish option. I'm only halfway through the iOS process. Unfortunately, Apple have made it a little bit more difficult again. The certificate file I can use for multiple applications. So once I've got that cert file, keep it safe. You don't have to repeat that process. But what you do require is a provisioning profile for each application that you create. Now, to generate a provisioning profile, you jump back onto your developer.apple website and you select the fact that you want to create a provisioning profile. You get prompted as to what type of profile you need, and there's options such as an app development profile or an app store profile. You can create an ad hoc profile which allows you to distribute to a limited number of devices while testing. As you step through and register your application, you can follow the wizard, giving it details as to your app, whether you're using an explicit app ID. And my suggestion is always to keep it simple. One explicit app ID per app works well. The bundle ID that Apple prefer is the domain name or reverse domain name style. So in this case, com.devexpress. Whatever the application is going to be called. You can come through and enable specific services that you want for the device. So it may be that you want to store high scores in the game center, or that you want to allow push notifications to be sent out, etc. If you don't need the service, don't select it. Once you've got all that set up, you get the confirmation. Your app becomes registered with a unique identifier, and you can then go through and download your provisioning profile. So once you've created your app, you then select provisioning profiles, select the app ID that you want, select your certificate, which of course you've now already applied, create your profile name, and you're ready to download your provisioning profile. If you're looking to deploy to the App Store, these steps are critical. If you've got the wrong choices inside your provisioning profiles, your app can be rejected. Out of all the stores that I've worked with, Apple are the most difficult to get your head around sometimes. There's a lot of different loops. It really comes down to reading the documentation and looking at the wizard. The good news is, once you've got your provisioning profile, you select it into the Visual Studio wizard, and you're ready to press build. I said before, you don't need a Mac. The build process will go through, it will wrap everything up, it will create a completely signed IPA that is ready to upload to the App Store. If you're using a developer profile or an ad hoc profile, you can push that IPA through TestFlight or through iTunes or other ways of getting it out to the device. No Mac involved. It's a similar process for developing on the Android platform, although Google have made the registration process a lot simpler than that of Apple. Your first step is going to be going to developer.android.com, registering. You'll notice on this screenshot that whilst I had a registered developer account, I hadn't actually paid the necessary fees. So before I could continue, I had to go through, pay the registration fee, accept all the agreements. But as you can see, it's a nice, easy to follow wizard. Everything's on the one screen. Once you've completed that process, you come through, fill in your developer name, your email address and contact details, and you're then ready to sit inside the developer console. If I wanted to publish an app to the App Store, or the Google Play Store, sorry, I can come through and create a new application. And you'll notice there's an option there already just to say upload APK. So it's a lot simpler as far as generating things. You do need to fill out all the details before you're allowed to upload or to start promoting an app, and the same goes for both stores. But the process of getting this far on Android, there's no messy certificates to sign. One thing that you do need, however, is to have a certificate generator that is included in your APK. Now, as we saw with the iOS side of things, the DevExtreme mobile wizard is going to allow us to create that. So we can simply choose the generate certificate, fill in all the details, give it a password, and generate. And that's all there should be to it. I get to nominate my certificate password and choose the build option, and I'm going to go through and see everything built. You'll notice on this screenshot of the build log that I've got warnings. And this is what I was mentioning earlier about those missing image files. So if I've missed some of those steps, I'm going to get prompted at this point. It's not going to not build it for me, but obviously if I'm missing icons, I may be rejected from the appropriate stores. But by just pressing build, I now have a .apk file ready to use. If I wanted to deploy out to the PhoneGap build service, it's really just as simple as clicking on the zip option. It will come through and create that PhoneGap zip file. So those processes really shouldn't take, once you've got your certificates in place, you can quickly build the packages and get them ready to deploy across any of the stores. One thing that's often asked when I talk to people about DevExtreme Mobile, particularly if you're coming from a .NET background, is how you get started in learning some of the processes. The DevExtreme Mobile website is definitely the best place to start. Not only does it provide some samples, the documentation, the guides, the tutorials, it can step you through everything you need. Now, one thing that I should mention, when you download and install the DevExtreme package, we also supply source code for a number of complete demos, including the kitchen sink demo, which explores just about every possible widget that we have inside that package. The DevExtreme mobile site, you can come across, have a look at mobile development, come down to the documentation, and it will step you through every aspect of what you need to do. Let's close the little pop-up, including how to implement a simple mobile application, all the specifics. It will take you through what goes behind an SPA or a single page application. The really cool thing with the website, as you step through some of the examples, it will give you the code, it will show you in real time some of those complete examples. There's tutorials available on the website, taking you through everything you need to do. As I scroll down here, we're going to see the Chrome on the right-hand side also gets updated at different things. They're very, very easy to start out learning if HTML, JavaScript isn't your strong point yet. The huge benefit is that you can do it all inside the comfort of Visual Studio, the environment that we all love. Julian, Amanda, anybody in the background, how are we doing for questions?
Hey Paul,
hey, Paul.
It's Julian here.
We're doing great in the
background
background.
well. We're going to fight over the questions now, so stand back. Amanda, you go first.
Oh my God. All right. So the first question came in from Tony Fox. He says he's starting to prototype with the DevExtreme framework. Fantastic, coming from a C# ASP.NET background. The company I work for has gone through a digital transformation project, and now they use Google Apps, Docs, etc. The prototype needs to use OAuth 2. Any plans to make this more native with the framework?
Go with the hard questions first. Thanks, Amanda. Look, if you're looking at deploying out to the individual devices and utilizing the PhoneGap framework that we work with, then there is obviously support for OAuth 2 already inside PhoneGap. It is a great question, and one that I will follow up with the mobile team as a separate issue or question. I do know that there's some really cool, exciting things coming out with DevExtreme Mobile in 14.2, and it's only a couple of weeks away from a full presentation with Julian and I showing you what's been happening behind the scenes. So I'm not allowed to say too much today. I'm under embargo, so it's, yeah, watch this space. But certainly I'll follow up on the auth question with the team.
All right. Question came in. Does it support offline?
The framework itself definitely supports offline. If you've developed an application that's running on a device, you do not need to have live connection. If your question relates to does the OData service wizard we've built support offline, then the short answer to that is no. you'll still need to do some caching, some manipulation on the device level. When it comes to working with data on devices, the offline-online sync, it's a huge can of worms to open. And I say to developers, particularly when they're starting out in this process, really look at what you need to achieve. In some cases, you're always going to have a mobile connection. In some cases, you might never have one. And so I've worked with teams that have done things that just work on a sync as needed basis or sync when possible. When you start looking at that, you're looking into a larger framework at the back end. So not necessarily the OData service wizard, but maybe something more to do with a WCF custom web service. Obviously, again, the data stores, we have a great engine built around the data handling. You can use arrays, you can use SQLite, you can use pretty much any type of data store that's available on the device for capturing that information.
I would just like to add there, we are doing some investigation. I responded to someone's question like 10 minutes ago about this. We are doing some investigations into interfacing with popular sync type frameworks, offline online sync frameworks, things like Parse, and somebody pointed out Breeze and JData or something like that. We are looking into it. I don't have any great news at the moment about A, when it'll be available, and B, if we can really do it ourselves and create our own offline online sync framework. So stay tuned on that one, I'm afraid.
But the beauty with the DevExtreme mobile framework, it complements other things out there. There's nothing stopping you using one of those external frameworks with the package. All we're doing is providing wrappers, libraries, widgets with existing HTML, JavaScript libraries as they are. So it could be that instead of using Knockout or Angular, you want to use one of the other frameworks. It's all possible. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're extending what is out there.
Great. From Osman, do we have to extract our package as a zip package when we're adding PhoneGap plugins, or can we do it in build native packages?
Okay, so if you're wanting to include some plugins and you're working with the process for PhoneGap, what you can do is come to the properties window and you can come down to zip package and add your plugin list. Now, if your question was, do you have to extract your zip and then add your plugins into the zip as well? It's a great question because I don't have the answer. So I will find out on that one. Obviously, thinking about it, if it's not already included in the bin folder, then you would have to add your packages to the zip afterwards. But I will follow up with the team.
Is it possible to deploy the app a different way to the devices outside of the App Store? For instance, a line of business app, from Charles.
Okay, absolutely. Now, it's again easier to do on the Android market because on the device itself you can say that you want to install a third-party app. When it comes to iOS, there's a couple of ways to handle it. If it's just a small internal application and you're dealing with a handful of devices, you can use the ad hoc deployment method, which is where you add your device IDs into the Apple Developer Profile Center, and those IDs get built as part of the profile, the provisioning profile. If you're wanting to do a larger enterprise deployment, then you can apply to Apple to be an enterprise developer. This requires some extra steps to go through, and instead of being the $99 a year, I think it's $299 a year. But what that means is that you can deploy to an unlimited amount of devices inside your organization without having to go through any App Store approval. And the deployment is as simple as setting up a web page with a hyperlink and then using that on the device to download and install. So there's a lot of information on the Apple website about enterprise deployment. I've had a lot of success with both options going through the App Store. The downside of the App Store process, obviously, is you can be waiting a week before your app's released. Any updates you do have to go through the App Store. Again, you have to go through that process. The enterprise and ad hoc deployment methods mean that you get your app out there onto devices being tested or being used without any of that interference.
All right. Does DevExtreme support push notifications?
DevExtreme as a library package doesn't support push, but the PhoneGap system does. So you can expand on that with what's available inside the PhoneGap documentation. Anything you find on the PhoneGap site, so use of their libraries or calls, they're available within DevExtreme because we're built on top of the PhoneGap framework.
Is a calendar day view control delivered with DevExtreme?
One of the widgets, we have the date widget and currently the calendar widget, which is the typical 1 to 30 style approach. We don't have a scheduler control at this stage.
All right. In playing with a mobile app in DevExtreme, by default it doesn't auto-scroll data on smaller screens. Is there an easy way to do that, or do you need to format for each one separately?
Okay, can you repeat the question, please, Amanda?
Yes. It's from Larry. He says, in playing with a mobile app in DevExtreme, by default, it doesn't auto-scroll data on smaller screens. Is there an easy way to do that, or do you need to format for each screen separately?
You can do conditional formatting depending on device. That's certainly one option. I'm not sure what you mean by doesn't scroll automatically, so maybe you could ping me, Larry, and we can take a look at that project. Certainly, anything that you do inside a typical web page, whether you're doing scroll views or everything's available inside the DevExtreme package as well, because obviously we're rendering all the code to the browser or the inbuilt browser inside the application.
Let's see, from Raymond, do you have an example of toggling between different display modes such as landscape or portrait and rendering different UI based on the changes? For example, adding, removing elements, redesign positions, etc.
I don't have any examples that I can just pull up in an instant. More than happy to provide you a couple of examples on a blog post over the next week or so. I know exactly what you're talking about. If you rotate the device from portrait to landscape, you might want to show some extra information or hide information. There are events to cater for that, and because of that adaptive responsive layout, it's certainly possible.
Does it support gathering location, GPS, with accuracy?
Absolutely. So if you're working inside, if we go to the capabilities inside Visual Studio, you can turn on the geolocation option, and if you check out the DevExpress YouTube channel and search for Finding Your Way with DevExtreme, there's an entire presentation where we show you how to use the GPS information that's returned.
Is there any support for Signal R? From Mark.
Now, my understanding, Signal R being a .NET framework, and we're not working in the .NET space here, so I've not had a play or had any experience with trying to implement anything from Signal R into a DevExtreme mobile application.
This is from Miguel. This is my first DevExtreme webinar, so maybe you answered this question, but is it possible to use originally native libraries in any projects? And is it possible to interact with hardware framework like a USB host in Android and iOS?
Okay. So part one of your question, interacting with native libraries, only if you can do it through the PhoneGap framework. part 2 of your question, it's all achieved through plugins and things that have been put into the PhoneGap framework. So if you look at the PhoneGap documentation and it says there's a call you can make out to the USB or the GPS or the camera, it becomes available inside DevExtreme Mobile.
From Andrew, why would I want to use an app store? Most software is business custom applications, not available to the public, only to specific machines or phones. How do I distribute to my own phones, etc.?
Okay. There is certainly, it's not a requirement of using DevExtreme Mobile to go to the App Store. You can use the example I provided before of ad hoc deployment on iOS or just exporting the APK and installing it on an Android device. You do not have to go through the App Store. And for a lot of our audience, yes, you might be developing line of business applications or working for something in-house. But there are a lot of people, even corporates or businesses, that push their application via the App Store. It might be something that's developed for their customers, for example. So one local business here in Brisbane wanted their customers to be able to access information off their mainframe. They developed an app. Because it breaches the enterprise agreement with Apple, it's not their internal use, they had to put it through the App Store. There's lots of different options available. It's about choosing the right scenario for the job you want to do.
All right, we have time for just a couple more questions. Let's see, from Justin, can we use the scaffolding feature from WCF service after the project is built?
You can. The idea behind the OData service is to give you a good starting point. There is nothing saying that you have to do it in that particular order. There's also the ability, if your data model changes inside that data wizard, to go through and update and add new tables or fields, etc. to the project.
From Dan, if you use the enterprise web page distribution method, how do you let your end users know there is an updated version?
If you're doing it through, sorry, are we doing it through the App Store or doing it through an ad hoc method?
I don't know.
If you're doing it through
ad hoc
okay,
method.
so ad hoc, it comes down to how you want to implement this. My favorite way is to have a version text file sitting on a server somewhere, and when the app starts, it checks for the existence of that version file, compares it to what is running locally, and then prompts the user if there is an update. It works really, really nicely. It says, hey, there's an update, do you want to download it? Yes, no. If it's yes, it simply exits the app and shells out to the external URL to install it again. Another great way, of course, is just email them.
Is it possible to debug an app on a smartphone?
There is no support for connecting a device and debugging out to the device. You'd use it via the simulator.
All right, let's see. One more question since we've hit our hour mark. Larry expanded on his previous question about the scrolling. He says, per my scrolling question, if a text box is too large to show on an iPhone, it will cut off on the left rather than a scroll bar automatically appearing.
Okay. Well, Larry, I would love you to send me a quick email, and I'll spend a couple of minutes looking at that with you and seeing what you've implemented or how and what options you have.
All right, let's see. At what point, well, from Charles, at what point, in your opinion, do you go from a fully responsive website that scales on all devices, which we're doing with all DevExpress ASP.NET controls, to a DevExtreme mobile application?
So it comes down to picking the right tool for the right job. If you need something deployed to a device, or you want something that's lighter weight than an ASP.NET application, you need to look at the HTML JavaScript solutions. Obviously, you're not going to be able to deploy an ASP.NET application to a device. So you've got those considerations. A lot of it comes down to looking at what you're trying to achieve. There are so many tools out there to let us do our jobs, and one of the biggest problems is which one do we choose. I always come back and say, well, what are we trying to achieve? How much do we need to do? There's still a big place for writing responsive websites in ASP, but of course if you're trying to be working offline, that's not going to work on a device either.
All right, that is all the time we have. That's all the questions we have time for, all the time we have questions for. But we keep these questions, and Paul will get a chance to go through them, and maybe you can answer a couple of these in your blog post. So,
absolutely. Shameless plug for the webinars, Amanda.
All right, everybody. We have officially released our 14.2 webinar launch schedule. Please feel free to register for them at devexpress.com/webinars. Also, next week, just before the Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States, November 25th, Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, DevExpress MVC extensions getting started again with Mr. Paul Usher. See how to use the DevExpress template wizard to kickstart your project, get the most from the scaffolding wizards to save time in coding, set up and configure critical elements of a data-driven site, including data grids, editors, and themes. And then, starting December 1st, what's new in WinForms 14.2, December 2nd, what's new in ASP.NET, including web forms and MVC, December 3rd, reporting and dashboards. All of those are at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then also December 3rd at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, HTML5 and mobile. December 4th at 10 a.m., XAF, and then December 5th, what's new in CodeRush 14.2, also at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And again, seating is limited, so you can register today for your spot. All right, everybody, that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Paul. Thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress.